Beautiful smile, but it seemed to be concealing something else behind it. As he wondered what that something else might be, unease crept through Momonga. The NPCs were loyal to him, but would they stay that way? If this were in the real world, subordinates would no longer be loyal to superiors who constantly screwed up. Would the NPCs be that way as well? Or was it that once they were programmed to be loyal, they would stay that way forever? If their loyalty to him wavered, how should he regain it? Rewards? There was vast wealth in the treasury. Although it pained him to expend the treasures left behind by his former comrades, they would probably understand if it was for the sake of Ain's Ulgaun. The question would then be how large of a reward he should give. In addition, was he superior to others by virtue of being higher ranked? But what criteria could he use to quantify his superiority? He was not clear about that yet. He had the feeling that as long as he kept this dungeon going, he would eventually come to understand these things. Or did that mean power? He opened his left hand and gripped the staff of Ain's Ulgaun that sailed into his grasp. Overwhelming power? The 7 gems set into the staff gleamed brightly, as though imploring their master to use their colossal might. Forget it, I'll take my time to think about that later. Momonga released the staff he held, and the wavering staff fell to the ground as though it were angry at him. In any case, as long as he acted the part of the leader, they would probably not raise their hands against him right away. Be it among animals or humans, enemies would probably not attack if their intended prey did not reveal any weaknesses. Momonga declared in a powerful voice, Pleiades. Other than the maids selected to accompany Sebas, the rest of you will head to the 9th floor, and repel any invaders from the 8th floor. Understood, Momonga-sama. The maids behind Sebas acknowledged his orders respectfully. Begin immediately. Understood, my master. Once more the chorus of voices rang out. Sebas and the maids bowed once more to their lord who sat upon the throne, then stood and left simultaneously. The giant doors opened, and then closed again. Sebas and the maids vanished beyond the doors. It was good that they had not replied with a no, or something similar. A great weight seemed to lift off Momonga's chest, and at the same time he looked at the person who had stayed by his side. That person was Albedo, who had stood by, awaiting orders. She smiled and asked him, then, Momonga-sama, what will you have me do next? Got it. Momonga rose from the throne to retrieve his staff, and as he did that, he spoke, come to me. Yes. The smiling Albedo drew closer. Although Momonga was wary of the black wand and orb she had been carrying, that caution passed in an instant, and he decided to temporarily ignore its existence. Just as Momonga finished thinking that, Albedo was close enough that he could embrace her if he wanted. She smells nice, wait, what am I thinking? Momonga cast out the thoughts which had rose up inside him again. Now was not the time for fooling round. He reached out his hand to touch Albedo's. MF. A pained expression flickered across Albedo's face. Momonga drew his hand away, like he had received an electric shock. What's this? Did I make her feel uncomfortable? Several bad memories ran through his mind, like being hit by loose change that fell from the sky, but in the end Momonga found his answer. Overlords required levels in the Elder Lich racial class, and among the abilities Elder Liches possessed was the ability to inflict negative energy damage on anything they touched. Was that the reason? Although, even if it really was the reason, he still had some questions to ask. In Yggdrasil, the monsters and NPCs that appeared in the great underground tomb of Nazarick would be recognized as belonging to the Ain's Ulgaun faction. Since every member of the guild was also flagged as belonging to Ain's Ulgaun, there should be no problems even if they attacked each other. Could it be that she no longer belongs to our guild? Or has friendly fire been enabled? The latter possibility was more likely. With that conclusion in mind, Momonga apologized to Albedo. Forgive me. I forgot to deactivate my negative energy touch skill. Please pay it no heed, Momonga-sama. That damage hardly counted as damage. And as long as it is you, Momonga-sama, I would gladly endure any kind of kia. Is that so? No, I must still apologize. Momonga was caught off guard by Albedo's adorable yelp, and the way she shyly covered her face, and his reply ended up being less dignified than he had hoped for. So it was due to the negative energy touch after all. Momonga turned his eyes from Albedo, who was going on and on about how this was nothing compared to the pain of losing her virginity, and began thinking about how to temporarily deactivate the always-on skill, and then he suddenly knew how to do it. To Momonga, who wielded the power of an overlord, it was as simple and natural as breathing. He could not help but laugh at the strange situation he found himself in. After all the shocks and surprises he had received so far, this was hardly worth panicking about. It was frightening how well he had adapted to his condition. I'm going to touch you. After deactivating the skill, he touched Albedo's hand. Thoughts like her hands so slim, her skin so white, and so on raced through his head, but he cast aside these male desires and focused on one thing, the pulse at her wrist. It was there. It was a steady rhythm, lube-dub, lube-dub. She was a living being, so it was only natural. Yes, she was alive. Momonga released her hand and looked at his own arms. All he saw was an expanse of polished white bone, bereft of skin or flesh. Because he had no blood vessels, he could not feel a heartbeat. Indeed, an Overlord was an undead creature, a being that had transcended mortality itself, so obviously it would not have a heartbeat. He shifted his gaze to Albedo. Momonga saw himself reflected within Albedo's moist golden eyes. Her cheeks were pink, probably because her body was rapidly heating up. The changes in her body surprised him. What's this? Is she not an NPC? Is she not pure electronic data? Why does she feel like a real person? What kind of AI could do this? More importantly, why is it that Yggdrasil feels like the real world? Impossible. Momonga shook his head in denial. There was no way such a fantastic scenario could have occurred. But once the idea took root, it was not easy to eradicate. Momonga was not sure how to proceed given the changes in Albedo. The next step, yes, the final step. If he could confirm that, then all of his predictions would be vindicated. Was this real life, or was this just fantasy? He had to do this. If she attacked him with that weapon of hers, it could not be helped. Albedo, may I touch your breasts? The air between them seemed to freeze. Albedo's eyes went wide. A wave of depression washed over Momonga as he considered his words. I have to do this, what the hell was he thinking, saying that to a woman? He wanted to scream despicable, at the top of his voice. Indeed, using one's superior position to commit sexual harassment was the most despicable thing imaginable. But he had no choice. Indeed, he had to do this. As Momonga convinced himself with all his strength, his composure gradually returned to him. Resuming the air of a proper ruler, he continued forcefully, that should be fine, right? It was not fine at all. In contrast to Momonga's nervous request, Albedo seemed to be overflowing with joy. She gave him a glittering smile. But of course, Momonga-sama. Please, help yourself. Albedo straightened herself up, presenting her ample twin peaks for Momonga's inspection. If he still had saliva, he would have swallowed several times by now. Her breasts swelled up through her dress. And now, he was going to touch them. On the other side of his abnormal tension and nervousness, a quiet, calm part of Momonga's brain was observing his own actions. He noted how foolish he was, and wondered why he had thought of this, and why he was still going to follow through anyway. He sneaked a peek at Albedo, and found that her eyes were shining, jiggling her bosom as though to say hurry up and touch me. Not knowing whether it was because of excitement, or embarrassment, Momonga steadied his hands with sheer force of will, steeled his resolve, and reached out. The first thing Momonga felt was something hard under the dress, followed by a soft, yielding sensation. Fua. HAA. As Albedo moaned wetly, Momonga completed yet another experiment. If his brain was normal, there were two possible explanations for his present situation. The first was that this was a new DMMORPG. That was to say, the moment Yggdrasil had shut down, a new game, Yggdrasil 2, had immediately taken its place. However, in light of this experiment, the probability of that being the case was vanishingly small. This was because our 18 actions were strictly forbidden in these games. Who knew, perhaps even our 15 actions might be banned as well. Violators would be publicly listed on the game's official website, and their accounts would be deleted, or worse. Once the records of these our 18 actions were publicly released, they might be punished for damaging moral culture, and thus violating the Social Order Maintenance Act. As such, most people would consider these acts off-limits. If they were still in a game world, the company should have made it impossible for players to do such things. If the GMs and the game companies were watching, they would have prevented Momonga from performing lewd actions. However, there was no sign of any resistance or opposition. In addition, one of the fundamental rulings which pertained to DMMORPGs was that forcing a player to participate in a game without permission could be treated as a form of cyber-kidnapping. As such, forcing a player to test out a game in this manner was a prosecutable offense, especially if there was no way to force quit the game. It would not be unexpected for a company to receive fines or jail time for such things. If a situation arose where a player was not able to log out of the game, up to a week's worth of game activity could be stored in a legally mandated record, which would make it easy to prosecute the company for their violations of the law. Therefore, if Momonga did not report to work for a week, someone would have found it strange and come to his house to check on him. Then all the police would need to do was to access the records with a specialized console, and the problem would be solved. Which company would risk arrest, or worse to commit a corporate crime like this? Of course, they could try to muddy the waters by saying this was a closed beta test for Yggdrasil 2, or there were third-party programs used here. But in truth, such a risky matter would have no benefits at all for the game company. That being the case, the only answer for his present circumstances would be that a third party was doing something here, and it had nothing to do with the game company. If that was the case, he would need to throw out all his previous theories and think in other directions, otherwise he would never find the answer. The problem was that he had no idea where to start. And there was another possibility, the possibility that the virtual world had become reality. Impossible. Momonga promptly rejected that idea. How could such an illogical, foolish thing happen? But on the flip side, the more he thought about it, the more strongly he felt it was the right answer. And then, Momonga remembered Albedo's scent. In accordance to the software legislation for virtual reality games, such games were not allowed to provide sensory data for smell and taste. Although Yggdrasil had food and drink items, consuming them was little more than changing a value in the game system. In addition, the sense of touch was heavily limited, in order to prevent confusion with the real world. These limitations meant that VR systems were not very useful for the sex industry. However, none of these limitations were in effect now. Realizing these facts shocked Momonga. Countless questions like, what about tomorrow's work? What'll happen if this keeps up, flashed through his mind, but then he cast them all to the back of his mind. If this virtual world is just a simulation of the real world, then the quantity of data involved must be unimaginable. Momonga swallowed with a non-existent throat. Though his mind could not comprehend the situation, his heart could. His hands finally left Albedo's ample bosom. He realized that he had been groping her for a long time, but Momonga justified it to himself by saying that he had no choice but to grope her for that long, and it was definitely not because squeezing her supple flesh felt so good that he reluctantly let go of her, or something. Sorry, Albedo. Fua. A sensual moan came from the red-faced Albedo, and he could practically feel her body heat raising the surrounding temperature. After that, she shyly asked Momonga, will I have my first time here? Momonga was caught off guard by her question, and before he could think clearly, he replied, eh. His mind was suddenly frozen, and was unable to parse her question, first time? What's that? What's this all about? And why does she look so shy? May I ask how you wish to dispose of my clothes? Wha? Would it be better if I disrobed myself? Or would you like to unwrap me, Momonga-sama? Or if we did it while I was wearing the dress, afterwards, it would get dirty and no, if you want me to wear this dress, I have no objections, Momonga-sama. His brain finally managed to make sense of Albedo's words. Although whether there really was a brain under that skull remained to be seen. As Momonga realized why Albedo had this reaction, an immense struggle took place within himself before he finally said, enough, that's all for now, Albedo. Eh? I understand. Now is not the time for it, no, there's no time for that sort of thing. My apologies. I allowed myself to be ruled by my desires despite the urgency of the situation. With a swift movement, Albedo made to genuflect in apology, but Momonga stopped her, no, all this is my fault. I forgive you, Albedo. That aside, I have an order. Please give me any command you desire. Tell the guardians of each floor, with the exception of the 4th and the 8th floors, to meet at the Colosseum on the 6th floor in an hour's time. I will contact Aura and Mare myself, so there is no need to inform them. Understood. Allow me to repeat the order. Aside from Aura and Mare of the 6th floor, I am to inform all the floor guardians to meet 1 hour later at the Colosseum. Correct. Go. Yes. Albedo swiftly departed the throne room. As he watched the retreating Albedo, Momonga let himself sigh, in a way that suggested he was thoroughly exhausted. Once she left the throne room, Momonga groaned painfully, oh, what have I done? It was supposed to be a silly joke. If I'd known I wouldn't have done it. I've soiled the NPC Tabula Smaragdina-san created. When he thought about it, there was only one reason why Albedo would react like she had. It must have been when he was editing her backstory, and changed that line to she is in love with Momonga. That must have been why she acted that way. Ah shit. Momonga muttered to himself, thinking about how Tabula Smaragdina had painstakingly created his masterpiece Albedo out of whole cloth, and then someone else had splashed paint all over his work at will, and now she had become like this. The knowledge that he had ruined someone else's hard work made him feel miserable. However, the frowning Momonga, although it could not be seen because he was a skeleton, eventually rose from the throne. Momonga told himself that he had to leave this at the back of his mind. After the important things were taken care of, he could agonize over it later. Clone. New paste. Few persons can be made to believe that it is not quite an easy thing to invent a method of secret writing which shall baffle investigation. Yet it may be roundly asserted that human ingenuity cannot concoct a cipher which human ingenuity cannot resolve. Edgar Allan Poe. Oh.